Hi, everybody. I am Kathy H., and I'm recovering one day at a time in the worldwide Al-Anon family groups. Hi, it's nice to be here. I'd like to thank Marlene and the committee for your kind invitation to come to this convention. In particular, I'd like to thank Carrie for her wonderful brand of hospitality, Armand as well. They both, at different times, stayed in contact with me, as did Marlene. And, it just is all a piece of feeling very, very much welcomed up here. So I thank you for that. You know, I don't know that it's much colder here than it is in Cincinnati, but it looks so much colder here. Gosh, I think there's probably something else I want to say, but I don't know what it is. So I'll just say that I appreciate your remarks, Brenda. You know, sometimes as a member of Al-Anon, you just have to go through so much. At certain conventions, you know, you have to sit through all the Al-Anon jokes and yak. And, you know, sometimes, just as she said, I want to say, excuse me, Al-Anon's about us. It's really not about you. Sometimes I'm asked to speak in a halfway house for recovering men, most of whom are on their way from jail home. And really, it is supposed to be, I'm supposed to talk to their families who are supposed to come over on a Saturday afternoon, but all the years that I've been doing it, their families never come because they've lost them long ago. And so I'll just, you know, speak for a very short time, 20-25 minutes, and give them, you know, my experience of alcoholism as from my way of knowing it and experiencing it. And often afterwards they'll come up, and this one man came up. I mean, he's a big guy just out of prison for, I don't know what, you know, murdering nuns or something when he was under. And he's crying, you know, he's just crying. And he said to me, I just feel so terrible. I've done so much damage to my family. I've ruined their lives. And I said to him, you really don't have that much power, Bubba. And the reason that I say that is because, once I found my way into you, you are the ones that taught me that I was responsible for my own recovery from this disease, no matter what anybody else in my life was doing. That Al-Anon was about me and the damages and effects of alcoholism in my life. And that's what I needed to recover from. It wasn't about getting somebody else here. It wasn't about, learning to forgive. It was really about beginning with the grace of God and with your help, that process of recovery in my own life, so that I could become the kind of woman that I believe that God created me to be and continually challenges me to be every day. And I'm sure that can happen in a lot of different places, but quite frankly, the men and women that I know in Al-Anon, they look like the kind of woman I want to be. So having said that, I can back up a little bit and say really briefly, I don't like to spend too much time on the past, and yet sometimes I look at my watch and it's 30 minutes have gone by. I have a daughter who is in recovery now in the city of Chicago, and the first time she was asked to speak, she told me she was so nervous. Just in our little group, she was so nervous, and she said, I looked at my watch and I had been speaking for 45 minutes and I was still drunk. So I came from a great place. I came from a wonderful mother and father, and 5 brothers and sisters who I just love. The 6 of us have this tradition of going to New York City for a weekend in December. Just the 6 of us, just myself and my 5 brothers and sisters. We don't bring anybody else. And we just have an outrageously good time. So it's a close family. But I think it's a little bit unusual in that when I was growing up, I come from a mother and father who were very, very funny people. And so humor was always important. One time when I was trying to find you, I went to a social worker and she said to me, well, tell me about your family. And I said, my family? And she said, yes, tell me about your family. And I thought, oh my God, she is so off track. This isn't about my family at all. This is all about my husband. But I said to her, well, I don't know what to tell you about my family. It just seemed growing up, everybody laughed, everybody made light of everything. Humor was really important. And she said to me, well, that's pretty sick. And I thought, well, maybe it was sick, but we had so much fun. We just never, I was thinking of Jack talking about anxiety and creating chaos. We didn't have that, but we always had a lot of excitement. My father was a newscaster, and so, he was always rushing off to cover fires or floods or murders or, just robberies. And I think my mother, in competition with him, when he would come home from work and he would say to her, well, what went on? She would make the most mundane day sound like it was filled with all kinds. She didn't lie. She just exaggerated. She dramatized. And one time I said to her, as a young girl, I said, Mom, why do you always, I didn't say the word elaborate, but that's what I was going for. Why do you always elaborate? And she said, what do you think I'm going to say? Today I made 6 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and cut them all in half. And so I think because of that, myself, I have always been attracted to that which is exciting, without actually getting into the middle of it. But I learned to get into the middle of it and seemed to enjoy that as long as it worked. But that's just my background. Humor was important, and the other thing that was really important was faith. My parents just believed that everything would eventually work out. It would just work out. I had well over 16 years of an education, most of which was all, I was taught for over 16 years by nuns primarily. And that was where it was reinforced to me the importance of putting oneself last. I had a little nun that used to always say, the secret to joy is Jesus, others, yourself. And, that whole philosophy of suffering being good for you, that it would make you into a better person. But it had to be silent suffering. If you complained about it, negated the whole thing. So that a sense of silent suffering and doing for others and being for others. And, I just really got that a lot. And I'm sure somewhere in there somebody taught me the importance of taking care of myself, but I missed it. I don't know if I just wasn't paying attention. I, as a kid, really always knew the importance of paying attention to see how you were doing. How were you doing? And if you weren't doing all right, then for some reason I thought it was my job that I should just get in there and for you, make the rough road smooth. Even, not that you even asked me, but that was what I thought a good person did. And I carried that, into my marriage with me. I sensed that my husband needed me. Even before we were married, I just had a feeling that man was my God-given mission. And so, can you imagine? That's the way that was. But again, that background for me is humor, making, just always, no matter what came along, making it light, never complaining. I have a brother, my youngest brother, John. When he was 19, 20 years old, he was in the land, he was making his way through college by landscaping. So he was mowing lawns and trimming trees, and he got in over his head one day between his junior and senior year in college, and he was trimming the limbs of a tree for a woman, and a limb broke off, and instead of just what he thought it would do, which would be fall straight down, it jumped back and trapped him in the tree, and it ended up shearing off his entire left arm and left leg. And I've never in my whole life to this day since that time, I've never ever heard my brother complain. He's just never, and that's the piece of my family. There's just no There's just no complaining about it. He lives along the Atlantic coast today, and when my kids and I would go up east on vacation, he would meet us up there, and he would practice swimming in the ocean because he part of this fundraiser to raise money to save the Narragansett Bay, and it involves this 2-mile swim. But he'd come to the ocean with us, and he'd take off his arm and hand it to one of my kids, and take off his leg and hand it to another little group of my kids. Oh, they hated it. They hated it. And they're all dragging these parts, back to the, oh, Jesus. And there he just, hopped backwards into the ocean, and he would just swim, and I would lifeguard for him, and I don't know what I would have done had he gone under, but I'm not big on going out into the ocean. But, that's the way it is. You'd think he'd swim in a circle, but it didn't. It just, he just made the best of it, and my family never talks about it. We never talk about the fact that he's only half there. It just, we just go on, and my sister Karen has 3 of her 6 children have cystic fibrosis and, fatal disease. I have a little brother who lost a wife to breast cancer, leaving with 3 little kids. We just, that idea, I'm sure it comes from being raised from a generation that went through a world war and a depression. It's just, life is difficult, life is earnest. That's what my parents used to say. Life is real, life is earnest. And you just shouldered it, whatever it is. You just shouldered it. So when I got married, I knew within the first 2 weeks that something was wrong. I could not put my finger on it, but I knew that something was wrong. I had never dated my husband. We never lived in the same city. When I met him, he was in the Marine Corps, and he was in jet training down in Meridian, Mississippi, and then Pensacola, Florida. And I was in Cincinnati, and then later teaching school in Chicago. And so we never lived in the same city. It was just always when we could both get back to Cincinnati, we'd go out with one another, and then he'd go back somewhere in the South, and I would go back to Chicago. And all the things that I saw, all the red flags that I saw, I just assumed that it was because of this long distance romance. But I was convinced that once we were married, I'd be able to smooth off all of his rough edges. I knew that he came from a family of drinkers. And I just had a feeling that they just didn't understand him. And with love and patience and tolerance and kindness, I would be able to supply for him everything that he needed. And we say in Al-Anon that expectations are the seeds of resentment. That's what happened. That's what happened, because I just assumed that my marriage would reflect the marriage of my parents. And sometimes I speak about the burden of a happy marriage, because my mother and father, they never fought. They were just like living with this comedy team. They just never fought. Now, my mother, her parents are from Ireland. She can be hot-tempered, but my father never would step into the ring with my mother. He would, whenever she would be angry about something, he would say to her, "Agnes, come over here and let me cover you with kisses." And that was it. And I think that's what the social worker meant. It's kind of but that's the way they did it, and that's what I saw, and that's what I knew. I used to think when I would go to Al-Anon meetings and I would hear people talk about coming from alcoholic homes, and so much of it was familiar to them because that's what they grew up with, I would think, well, gee, at least you had some training. Anyway, there certainly is drinking in my family's background, but, all the stories that I ever heard about Irish relatives that drank too much were always told, they were always very humorous stories. They were always stories that, had a cute little ending or witty little lines. There was never any mention of, brokenness. There was never any mention of fear, of deep grief, of broken dreams. There was none of that in the stories that I heard as a kid. When I married my husband, he was in the Marines, and we knew that he was going to have to go to Vietnam. We just didn't know when that was going to happen. We were married in January. I got pregnant in February, and in March he got his orders that he was going to have to go to Vietnam by the end of April. I couldn't wait for him to go to Vietnam. Now, I couldn't tell anybody that, and that was the beginning for me of the secrets that I had to keep. I could never have sat with those other Marine Corps wives who were all wringing their hands. And what are we going to do? Should we stay here in Havelock, North Carolina? Should we all go back to where we're from? Maybe we could stay here and we could just all play cards. And I was like, oh my God, get me home. I just wanted to go home because I thought that if I could just get home, I'd be able to figure out what was happening. What was happening? It wasn't even the drinking, although I noticed my husband's drinking was different. It was different from most of those other guys. There was a lot of drinking that went on in the Marine Corps, especially among those pilots, but a lot of them seemed to get funny, when they drank, or they'd pretend like they were, jets and land on long tables at the O Club. And I mean, that was kind of funny when you were 20. I thought 22 was pretty funny, but his drinking was not funny. Somebody always got hurt. Somebody always got hurt. And so I learned to just lay low. I spent 12 years just trying to stay out of his way. And then I took it upon myself to try to help you stay out of his way. So if we were at a party or whatever, and you would say something that I knew was going to cause trouble, I would always try to stay just a little behind him and make eye contact with you, or, give you a look like, oh, God, don't say that, or, I just felt such a responsibility towards you. But would I ever think to say, to not get into a car with somebody that had been drinking? Something that as a high school teacher I say to my students every Friday? No, because if I ask you for a ride home, how would that look? How would that look? Being right and looking good became very, very important to me. They became very important to me. I was raised with this idea of never giving scandal. You never give scandal. You keep everything to yourself. Now, in my family, we really didn't have anything to keep to ourselves anyway. But that message was still there, how would things look? Keeping things to yourself. You don't ever, air your dirty laundry. That was just a given. So I found putting myself in very dangerous situations because that idea of making you think that I had everything under control was more important to me than my own health and safety. So I would just, seat belt myself in. If there was a seat belt, carry a rosary in my pocket and just pray that we were going to make it home in one piece. So after living with that kind of stress just for a short time, when he got his orders to go to Vietnam, I was like, oh, I'll just go back to Cincinnati and I'll just figure this all out. What's going on and what's wrong. I wish I heard somebody already say it at this convention. For me, it wasn't even the drinking, because the drinking at least would eventually lead to passing out. But it was the not drinking, it was the temper tantrums. I just never knew what was coming in the door. That's what was most bewildering to me. We talk in Al-Anon about a lot of things, anger, resentment. For me, I was just always totally bewildered and deeply, deeply sad. The grief, because I always had an idea of how my marriage would be, and it didn't resemble it at all. Not even in those first 6 months, which everybody had always told me were that was the golden time of your marriage. I could only think about what was to come. If 5 months in, I'm already hoping the guy, I never hoped that anything would happen bad to him in Vietnam, really. I knew that, no, I don't mean really. I mean, he just was always so talented. I mean, everything that he did so well. I used to watch him do what they would call touch and goes, where they had to, land, they were practicing landing on carriers, and they would do touch and go, so they would always try to catch that wire, which was a painted line on these airfields. And he was just so accomplished and wonderful at everything that he did. So I never worried particularly about his being shot down, but I used to think, maybe if he were just captured and tortured, just a little bit, that it would straighten him out, that he would have some sort of a spiritual experience, and then he would come home and he would be kind and loving and mend his ways. And I can just tell you, I knew just in the beginning I was out of my league. I was just over my head, out of my league, and didn't know what to do. So I went back home. As the squadron moved out, I went back home. And I went immediately to the priest that had married us, and I said to this priest, I don't know what's wrong here. But there's just this tension and fear in the house, and I don't know what to attribute it to, and I'm just miserable, and I'm pregnant now with this first baby. And the priest said to me, well, you come from a long line of pretty assertive women. Maybe you just need to learn to take a back seat in this marriage. And that's the best that he had to offer, and that's okay. But I had a sense that wasn't the answer. And I always, no matter where I went until I found you, I was always left with that lingering sense of, that's not it. I don't know what it is, but that's not it. I went to a social worker, a psychologist or something once. She said to me, you need to learn to speak in I statements. So I went home and I said, I hate you. There's my I statement. So, very quickly, back from Vietnam, no spiritual experience. But something awful happened to him when he decided to get out of the Marine Corps. He decided to use the GI Bill and go to dental school. And he was with a buddy from, that he had served in Vietnam with, and they met somewhere over in northern Kentucky, and they were in a horrible bar fight with brass knuckles. And this was right before my husband was supposed to start dental school at Ohio State University, and he got hit, I guess, I wasn't there, in the eye with brass knuckles. It split open a tear duct, which is necessary. Anyway, he had to go to the emergency, get all the surgery done, and then we went to dental school. And for those 3 years when he was in dental school, there was no drinking. I thought it was because something that I had done. I thought it was because I had been patient, I hadn't been a nag, I had suffered silently, I had been noble and living a life beyond reproach. And that was now, that was why everything now was peaceful, calm. We were working in this marriage group, couples, talking to couples about strong marriages. Anyway, so there you have it. And came back to Cincinnati in trouble, and I couldn't tell you what was happening. But things went back to the old crazy behavior. I could not find alcohol. I could not find any reason. All I knew was my behavior was changing. Now I'm back to fear. Now I'm back one more time to waiting to see how he was, so then I knew what was safe to be. If he came home and he was in a good mood, I got in a good mood because I wanted to take advantage of it. If he came in the house and he was in a bad mood, I just really tried to stay out of his way, tried to keep the kids out of his way. I'm forever running interference between him and the children. Always thought that was my job. Always thought that was my job, to stay between those two. And I began doing what I'd started from really shortly after we were married. I began one more time gathering evidence and building a case. Gathering evidence, building a case. Because I felt it was very important for people to know I was in the right and he was in the wrong. And so I'm holding on to all these hurts, all these wrongs, just keeping them fresh in my mind. It's just no way to live. It is just no way to live. What happened was, of course, that he had begun practicing dentistry, and now that he could, write prescriptions, he was writing prescriptions for himself, and he became addicted to narcotics. And it wasn't very long before he was caught and thrown out of dentistry. And I was so relieved. I had no idea that was going on until the day he was, had to turn himself in. And he had written me a letter. I mean, that's how badly our communication had broken down between the two of us. He wrote me a letter, and I'm reading this letter. Dear Kathy, I've been taking, writing myself prescriptions, and I'm blah, 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 and I have to leave now to turn myself in. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Thank God he's just a drug addict. I thought he was crazy. I'm like, oh, this is easily solved, They'll take away his right to love. This is simple, no brainer. And of course, as you know, that was always just the symptom. It was always just a symptom. I began then in earnest trying to cover everything up. I began in earnest then trying to package a story to sell to you about why this brilliant man, this wonderfully accomplished dentist, had now, given up his practice and was now hunting fox. I thought, I'll tell you what, I was good. I mean, really, I've often thought about applying to work for George Bush because I can put spins on things, I'm just very good at selling stuff. So I would say to people, they'd say, well, he's not being a dentist anymore? Why not? I go, well, you know what? He was just so much bigger than dentistry. Just so much bigger than that. He's decided to go into the fur industry. So that's really what he did. He trapped and caught fox and sold and skinned them and sold their furs to a furrier in downtown Cincinnati. Now the reality was that probably was a very lucrative profession in the 1780s, but in the 1980s, with a house full of kids, it just doesn't bring in a lot of income. So that financial insecurity and that fear. I'm a terrified woman. I am terrified. I have no idea what's going to happen next. That fear of the future, that living with that sense of impending doom. I never know if I'm going to have enough to feed my kids. I'm terrified that you'll find out what I'm really living with. And I'm trying so hard to make it look to his family and my family and all of our friends that everything is exactly how I had hoped and always wanted it to be. It's just an awful lot of work. It was exhausting. And to try to keep the reality of the situation from these kids, who were no fools, it just did me in. Physically, emotionally, and spiritually, it just did me in. Because alcoholism is a family disease. And when it came knocking at our door, it came for all of us. And that's just how simple it is. It comes for all of us. I don't know what to tell you. We used to live out in the country. It was his family's land. We had no money, ever. And so we lived really in a house that was owned by his parents, although his father died shortly after he got out of school. But his sisters lived on this land, and they used to have horses. But back in the woods, that's where he could hunt, and he would go out here and hunt. And eventually he would just hunt on the property at night with infrared glasses. And then he'd bring these beautiful animals in, and, he would just, skin them. We had this little breezeway. He would just skin them, and it wasn't unusual for my kids to come home from school, and you'd just see these little carcasses of these fox hanging by their feet, and, oh, my God. But the problem was, living out in the country, these encroaching suburbs. So now, all these people are moving in who don't belong to the family, and they're missing their house cats. And what happens to me is, in order to live with insanity, I think, in order to successfully live with insanity, you have to become insane yourself, or it's just too much of a split. So, I would say, Rick, these women are calling about their cats, and he'd say, we live in the country. If they're fat and they're killing our quail and pheasant, they must die. If they're scrawny and they're killing our quail and pheasant to survive, they can live. Well, that just made sense to me. I would think, well, I guess that's the law of the land, you know. If fat cat, you must die. Scroungy cat, you may live. So, I don't know, but it just got to the point where I didn't even want to answer the phone anymore. And many of us, you know, begin that isolation because it's just too much effort. It's just too much effort to project this image of everything being all right, project this image of happiness and health when everything's falling apart. So, you know, when I would get these calls, have you seen Buffy? I mean, I want to say, how much does Buffy weigh? Buffy's gone. I know Buffy's gone. I know by the name that Buffy ain't living anymore, but, you know, I just want to hang the phone up, and I don't even want to answer the phone anymore, because I don't know who's going to be the other end of it. I just don't know who's going to be the other end of it. And they wouldn't let their kids play at our house anymore, because, I don't know. There were times he was so talented, you know, he could hunt from our bed. He would leave the window open, and if birds, the same thing with the birds, you know. He had his suet, and he was a bird lover, unless you were a blue jay. And, you know, blue jays are the felons of the bird world, I guess. And they take everybody's nest and eggs, and I don't know what they do. But he didn't want those blue jays around the suet and this and that. So he slept with a gun, and God forbid a blue jay landed in that tree outside our window. So I would say to the kids, I would run downstairs and say to the kids, oh, don't play on this side of the house today. Dad's hunting. Take all your other buddies and go in. And watch out for the steel leg hold traps as you're on your way. So, of course, it wasn't long before the mothers, you know, the suburbanite mothers, weren't letting their kids play up there. But, you know, that's the kind of stuff, all that crazy that I was just always trying to fit it into this box that I could sell and make sense of it. And that's enough. That's how that was. Really, I don't want to talk about it anymore. That's just the way it was. It was just insane. But what's important to hear is that was me in there. You know, that's me in there matching it, you know, just one step ahead, trying to make it look crazy. And when I came to Al-Anon, it was almost like, that's crazy. And let it be. Know that it's crazy. Know that it's crazy. Thursday night, this is one reason I don't like to be taped, tell you the truth. Thursday night, a friend of mine who I've known for years. I have high school friends. We play cards the last Thursday of every month and been playing cards together since 1969. I mean, that's just what we do. But one of our number has a husband that just drinks terribly. I know he's been in the program, but he, you know, not for him. And things are getting very, very bad there, and I don't know. She's in a bad spot too, and I've taken her to Al-Anon. She doesn't like it, and it's not for her. And that's fine. But we went to the house, and the house is just to play cards. It was her turn to host it. And, you know, the Christmas tree, you know, not the whole Christmas tree, just the middle part of the Christmas tree where you stick the branches in, you know, that's up, and you know, all the Christmas decorations are up, and everything is a mess. And my dear friend is probably one of the neatest, most domestic people you'd ever want to meet in your life. So when you walk in here, you know, it's just something's bad. And we're playing cards, and there's this big crash upstairs, and this woman next to me, a high school friend who's been in the program for a number of times, she says, if you need any help, let us know. And she just keeps stealing the cards. And I think, you know, detachment, it's not kind and it's not unkind. That's what we say in Al-Anon. It's not kind and it's not unkind. It's just that we just don't get sucked into somebody else's consequences. So I don't know what happened, but I left because I knew I had to leave for Canada the next morning. So I said about 10:15, I got to go, you know, and I got home. And on my way to the airport, my cell phone is ringing already. And my friend says, what's wrong? What do you think's wrong? And I said to her, are you kidding? I mean, this is one of the visitors, not the woman that owns the house. I said, it's a drunk house. That's what a drunk house looks like. It looks like that. I mean, it's January 25th. The Christmas decorations are up. It's a mess. It's everything. People are falling out of their beds. It's a drunk house. She's like, what do you think? We should do anything? I said, well, I don't know. I mean, I know what I've done what I think I should do. Maybe we can. But if you're asking me what's wrong, I'm just telling you. It's a drunk house. And I'm not being mean or judgmental. I'm just being observant. That's what it looks like. That's what they look like. So, I have no idea where I am. How did I get over there? So, anyhow, craziness, that's what it looks like. It just is crazy. So, the people on the driveway, my sister-in-laws are all joining AA, and then the brother-in-laws are joining Al-Anon, and it just was like the domino theory, boom, 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 boom. I know they're coming for me, and they're always got the book. I used to call it the blue book just to piss them off. And they're like, it's not the blue book, it's the big book. I'm like, whatever. Anyway, so I'm in a prayer group. Thank you very much. I'm so glad you're sober, but I don't want to go to any more meetings. I do not want, I have been from 5 months into my marriage, I started on the journey. First the priest, then the social workers, then the all of them. Even a psychic, oh, for God's sakes. Even a psychic, which is completely against my religion, but I go to a psychic, with my little white candle, and this psychic says to me, I see help for you in the basement of churches. Woo! Anyway, and I think, oh yeah, I'm not doing anything anymore. I'm done. I'm finished. I hope he gets well. I hope things straighten out for him. But I have walled myself up so completely that I really become almost untouchable. And to tell you the truth, what that really means is you just die. You just die. Because alcoholism will just hollow you out. And that's where I was. I was just hollowed out. And I was thrilled that they were in AA. I was thrilled their spouses were in Al-Anon. And I mean that. I love my husband's family. I just love them to death to this day. To this day, they are good and active members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I adore them. They're good. But I didn't want to go. I just didn't want to do anything more. I was tired. But I'll tell you, that family disease thing, that's what scared me. Because I'm pregnant now with child number 7. And I used to, please! Sure, you've done everything your whole lives in moderation. Anyway. So anyway, I'm thinking, I will never get away from this. I'll never get away from this. I'm going to be surrounded with the crazy people all my life. I know this is going to happen to me. And I used to have this 5-year plan that at the end of my life, I'm sorry, I don't know why I said 5, it's 8. My husband was 4 years older than I was, and in America, generally, women outlive men by about 4 years. So I always had this idea at the end of my life, I'd have these 8 years, these 8 peaceful years, where I, could start the car without worrying that somebody had, taken it apart so I couldn't leave. That I wouldn't have to worry about tripping over carcasses, that I could answer the phone without fear, that fireworks weren't going off, that I didn't have to keep sleeping in a bedroom with loaded guns. I just thought, it'll be so peaceful. And now they're talking about it being in the family. I thought, holy God, I'll never, ever get away from the craziness. I'm going to go. I'm going to go to a meeting and just find out. I'm just going to go and get some information. And that's what I did. And my very first meeting, my very first meeting was April 5th, 1982. And at my very first meeting, it was a beginner's meeting, this woman said to me, I said, I don't know if I should be here or not. My husband doesn't drink every day. I really don't even think he's alcoholic. I know it's in the family, but I don't know that that's what he is. And she said, well, have you ever had a problem with his drinking? I was like, well, yeah, every time he drinks, it's a problem because bad stuff happens. And she said, well, you're in the right place because this really is a program for you. This is a program for you. And that's what I heard my very first night. And I have never forgotten it. Al-Anon is about me and my recovery from the disease. And that's really all it's about. It's not about anybody else but me. She also said that, alcoholism was a disease that I couldn't cure, couldn't control, and hadn't caused. Never thought I caused it, ever. First date I ever had with my husband, he arrived with a glass, a little silver monogrammed glass. Well, it was a cup, a little monogrammed cup, silver, filled to the brim with bourbon. And when I was 20 years old, I thought, wow, that's pretty neat. Because, of course, everybody I knew drank draft beer out of plastic, So I thought, wow, never thought I caused it, but always thought that if I were loving enough, if I were a woman enough, if I were really a good wife, I would be able to cure it. I always thought that. And now I'm in a meeting with men and women who tell me that really that's none of my business. That my husband's recovery is between him and the God of his understanding, and I have to take responsibility for my own recovery. And they were very, very clear about that. Very clear about that. And so really, I just, it was so attractive to me. It was so attractive to me. Your stories of strength, your stories of your own experience, your stories of courage. You attracted me by your sense of freedom, that you had a choice. You see, I came to you and I didn't feel like I had a choice about anything. I had to do what I was doing because what else could I do? I had to say what I was saying because I was, after all, the keeper of truth and justice in the relationship, And you are talking as though you have choices in your lives. You always have options. Nobody ever told me what to do. Nobody ever gave out advice. And for that, I am still very, very grateful. We don't give advice in Al-Anon. We shouldn't, at any rate, because none of us, it's just not the kind of group that we are. But we come together, as you did, and you shared with me, how you recover, how you practice the principles in your lives. And that made a huge difference for me. And you had what I wanted, and so I continued to come back, not really knowing what I would do. I just knew that when I was with you, I felt so much better. I felt like I didn't have to figure out everybody's life for them, that I could just concentrate on my own. You gave me that wonderful, you used to say, let go and let God, which at first sounded to me like a very bad idea. But you convinced me of the importance of learning to let go and let God. You taught me a little phrase, you could be right. I mean, there was a woman that used to always say that when someone would try to pick an argument with her, she would just say to them, oh, you could be right. So I would go home and Rick would say, and I'd say, oh, I don't know, you could be right. Yeah, you could be right about that. And it allowed me, I'll tell you, it just gave me so much time to do other things. Time that I would have spent, trying to be right, justifying, explaining, arguing, criticizing, all those things that I used to waste all my energy doing. And I could just say, well, you could be right, and get on with my own recovery. I have a friend who's not in the program, but she always, instead of whenever she hears that expression, let go and let God, she just simply always goes like this. She said, well, there's another way to say that. And I say, what is it? And she says, I just go like this. And for me it's a great visual, because now that's what I do when I just go. It's not up to me, because Al-Anon gives me this program really that's just rooted. It's rooted, like all spiritual programs, it's just rooted in such humility. That I really am powerless over so many things. But that I just simply have to learn and make a decision just to let go of them. And that has held me in good stead, because certainly, because it's a family disease, there have been others among those 7 children of ours who have struggled with both alcohol and drugs, but it's always primarily been with alcohol. Always primarily with alcohol. So I keep coming around, and I'm surrounded by men and women now who talk to me about, the importance of paying attention to this program, of embracing this program. The importance really of coming to believe, that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. And for me in the beginning, it really was the wisdom of the group. more so than a sense of a God, a particular God. It was that God working through the wisdom of the group where I began to feel restored. I was on a retreat one time, and this priest was telling a story about Buddhist monks who used to use this cup in their celebration, and it was a very valuable cup. Studded with jewels, and they would bring it down only during certain times. And one of the monks in the Buddhist monastery, when he was trying to get it down, it slipped and it broke. And they were all so upset, and they were all in a twitter over this broken cup, or it's I guess as much as Buddhist monks get into a twitter about anything. And they gathered up the pieces and they tried to glue them back together, and it wouldn't work, and they tried everything they knew, and eventually they took it to the artisan in their community, and he, using melted gold, soldered the cup back together so that it was more valuable now than it had ever been. And when I heard that story, I thought, that's a lot like Al-Anon. Because when I came to you, I really felt like I was so broken in so many pieces. And because of your willingness to be patient with me and your willingness to share your strength and your experience, you really have in so many ways restored me and brought me back, to a wholeness that I believe today is better than it's ever been before. And it continues just to get better. As you continue to show me, the importance of really that continual surrender, which is essential for my program, that continual turning things over and people over to the care of God, my life and my will and those people in my life. For years, I had been asking the wrong questions. What's wrong with him? Why does he do what he's doing? Why would he say that? Blah, 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 blah. And a fourth step for me just changed all of that. It allowed me to see that I had been asking the wrong questions, that I had to take a look at what we call in our literature our arsenal of weapons, that love and destroy respect. And I had to become responsible for those things that I said and those things that I did. And I had to go to my husband, and I had to make an amends to him. And I had to be willing to change. I had to be willing to begin to take responsibility for my own life and my own happiness, because, you see, I had always given him that job, and it was never his job to begin with. And when he failed at it, I used to blame him and judge him harshly and criticize him. And I learned that I just simply could not do that anymore, that I had to be about me. I had to look at what we say in Al-Anon, the 4 M's: mothering, managing, martyrdom, and manipulation. And that's what I had to look at in my own life and be willing to share that with a sponsor. I had the same sponsor today as I did when I came in. And she is the one that really taught me the importance through a 5th step of the freedom of forgiveness, of forgiving myself, of allowing things sometimes just to fall apart. That's what I think that I learned through the 4th and 5th step, that sometimes you just have to get out of the way and allow things to fall apart so that they can be reborn. I wasn't in the program very long. I'd just been in for 3 years when my husband, he always continued to fly. He flew these helicopters that he had built. Really, they were just like little lawn chairs. It was just really a lawn chair with a little motor and a blade. And he used to go out and fly on those things. It used to make me crazy because I was left home with all those kids. And somebody in my home group said to me one time, "Why do you get so mad that he does that? Does it bring him any sense of peace?" And I said, "Oh yeah, he loves when he's flying." And she said, "Well, then why would you want to take that away from him? He's not a bad man, he's just a sick man." You are the ones that taught me, that true love begins by allowing those we love to be themselves perfectly. That's from Thomas Merton. True love, the beginning of true love is to allow those we love to be themselves perfectly. And I began to see that all that flying and that for him was just part of him being who he was. And so one Memorial Day, 3 years after I'd gotten into the program, as he walked out the door, I said to him, "Rick, you have a beautiful day today. Have a ball." And those were the last words I spoke to my husband, because 3 hours later the police came to tell me that my husband had crashed and died. And I can remember, as they were standing there telling me that, his mother, who was the only living member of his family, she'd come up the driveway, and as she pulled in front of her house, someone had run over to talk to her, And as she came towards me, we'd both just heard the news almost at the same time, she put her arms out to me and she held me in her arms. She said to me about this son of hers who I know was always just had a special place in her heart. She said to me, "Thank God he's out of this pain." And I have not forgotten those words of hers, because I don't know why my husband has 5 siblings today who are sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous, but for him, it just wasn't something that he was able to hold on to. But I know that the God of my understanding holds him today, in merciful and compassionate arms, and that peace that it always eluded him, he has now. And that's enough for me. That's enough for me. This program held me in good stead, though, as I walked back into that house. And I had 7 kids there, the oldest of whom was only 14 years old. And it wasn't long before those kids began to I don't know what they did. They just got a little crazy, some of them, And I have some children that are just wired differently. They are just wired differently. I wouldn't change a hair on any one of their heads. But I've been to court a lot with my kids. That's all I can tell you. Trying to go quickly here. Really, one of my boys said to me not so long ago, not all of them live in Cincinnati. There are, a lot of them, or 4 of them are out of town. 3 of them are in town, but one of the boys said to me, when we were together, he said, Mom, we were horrible. We were horrible. He said, I can't tell you how badly I feel about that. We were just awful. And I said, you weren't all that bad. He goes, yeah, we were. And we knew this. We knew the deal. We knew the deal. We should have been a help to you, but we weren't. And, I was just getting ready to argue with him again, but I thought, there's this little prayer, God, sit on my tongue. And I thought, really, God, sit on my tongue. Let this kid make his amends to me. Because if that's what he needs to say, that's okay. But, in all honesty, when those kids were little, I went to, I took him to a counselor, a grief counselor, really. And after he had time to speak with all the kids, and we went back a few times, I said to him once on my own, I just really don't feel like there's any way I can raise all these kids alone. And he said to me, oh, you can't. You can't. You're understaffed. And that was so helpful to me to hear him say that. You're understaffed. Because it led me to see that all I could ever do was just what I could do. And when some of those boys started to get into, I completely missed this one daughter, but when the boys started to get into drugs and alcohol, I can remember a woman said to me, you really can't cure it. You can't cure it. But the best you can do as a parent is to continue to take small actions that interrupt their drinking and hope they stay alive long enough to get into Alcoholics Anonymous. It was the most helpful thing, another very helpful thing. Because instead of thinking, oh my God, I've got to save all these kids, I began to think in terms of, I'll just do the next right thing as a parent. And as things come up, I'll just take small actions. And that's what I did. Just took small actions that interrupted their drinking and still pray, that they make it to Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a couple of boys who have been in Alcoholics Anonymous, and now they've decided that it's really not for them. And I have said to them, well, you could be right. I don't know why you're in jail again, but... Anyway, talking about trying to be the best parent, just do the best you can. I've not done a great job. I mean, I just couldn't, but I really did do the best I can. I can remember one time one of my youngest sons was, I don't know what he was doing in school, but as soon as Rick died, I went back into school, and I got a job teaching high school for which I was never qualified. And so I was going to school at night and going to school in the summer, and this just kind little school just said, we don't care, just start working on it, and we'll give you all your insurance, and we'll give you all your medical, and just come and teach. So I started teaching high school, which I'd never done before in my life. And my kids, we moved back into the city. My kids are in this little grade school down the street, and the youngest one now is acting up. And it was nothing compared to the others. But, that's their story to tell you. But I went down there, and there's my youngest one. And, he's just a cute little kid sitting in this little chair. I'm a teacher who just sides with kids. I don't know why it is, but when teenagers get in trouble, my first instinct is to side with the teenagers. I don't know why. Maybe that's why I keep coming back, I have a friend that says, well, I go to a lot of meetings because I leak. Me too. So here's this little kid sitting in this little chair, and he's surrounded by all these adults. And so they thank me, for coming before I've got to teach my own high school students. And the one teacher, the principal says, well, let's begin. And the one teacher says, well, whenever somebody in the classroom sneezes, he falls out of his desk. I think that's hilarious. I think that's a very funny thing for a kid to do. But I don't say that. I'm like, okay. And the next teacher says, whenever I'm trying to teach, he taps that pencil on his desk, and he knows that it annoys me. I'm like, who are these people? But, and so and as each one goes, I see my son sink deeper and deeper into his chair. Well, after about 20 minutes of this, the principal says, well, I think we've heard enough. I'm sure Kathy, will talk to her son, and we'll continue this later. She's got to get to school. So I thank everybody for coming. And I say to my little kid, come with me. So I get him out to the car, and it's just cold, and, the roads are already icing up, and I know I got to get to the class, my own high school before the class. So I say to him, you listen to me, Nick. You're a good kid. You're a good kid, and I love you. And I know all those things we heard this morning are just minor things, but as a teacher, Nick, I know they irritate teachers. So you just have to knock that off. But know this, I and your father, wherever he may be, we are so proud of you. I just think you're terrific. Now you go back in there and you knock him dead. And he looked up at me and he said, I'm Daniel. All right, whatever. Just get out of the car. I got to go to school. So, that's just so typical of what kind of mother I was. I was just like, oh my God, just trying to do the best I can. Never always worked out, Oh, Jesus. My mother used to say, just crack those kids in the head. That's her theory for everything. Just crack them in the head. But the fact of the matter is my children they have kept me on my knees. They have kept me on my knees and in deep prayer, because I'll tell you what, they just, keep me in a very wonderful place of humility. They keep me in a wonderful place of humility, and I know that, they are in God's, they are in God's hands. They are in God's hands. I have a son right now who's in Iraq. It just, I do what I've always learned to do in this program. I have this God pocket. I light candles, and I know that child is in the hands of God. And I have no idea how it will work out, but I know no matter what, because of you, I never have to walk through anything alone. And that's really, for me, very important. So I continue to do what you tell me to do. I continue to, make my greatest amends by staying in a program of recovery. I was always told it was the most powerful thing I could ever do for my kids. I continue to do those daily inventories, to be of service when I'm asked, to sponsor women and to stay sponsored. I continue to find it very important and major to carve out of my day quiet time for prayer and meditation, to ask God's help to direct my thoughts, my words, and my actions as I go through the day. Because I believe really that all of us are invited into an intimate relationship with the God of our understanding. And I got my invitation through alcoholism. And my children will also get their own invitations, and how they respond to that invitation is none of my business. But I pray for only one thing for my kids, and that is that they will come to know and love God. And that really is about all I ever ask for my children, that they will come to know and love God. It gets pretty simple. When one of my girls graduated from college, the speaker was talking about her young son who had just learned the Lord's Prayer, and he was so anxious to recite it for her. And so finally she made time, and she said, let's hear it. And he said, Our Father, who art in heaven, how'd you know my name? And I think of that all the time. Because really, that's what Al-Anon has given me. It has given me a God who knows my name. And I believe that God also knows the names of my children. And for that, really, I am so very grateful. After 20 years of being a widow and raising these kids on my own, and I have to tell you, I used to be I loved being single. For me, it's just me. I loved it. So everybody was a little surprised when in the year 2005, I made a decision to remarry. And I married a man that I had known and had been friends with since I'd been 18 years old. And it has been, it has just been a blessing in both of our lives. When we got married in May of 2005, I had just finished, 20 years also of teaching high school. I retired from teaching in early May. My youngest son graduated from college. 2 weeks later, I retired from teaching, and 3 days later, Dan and I were married. And at our wedding, we were surrounded by men and women in the program, both in AA and in Al-Anon. And, all my women friends were asked to bring flowers, and they provided the flowers for the church. Every woman brought her favorite flowers, and I've taken those flowers and shaped them into a wreath that's above our bed, because I know that I've only gotten to where I am on the shoulders of men and women like yourselves who have loved me and who have been patient with me and who have taught me so much about the love and the grace of God in my life. And, for that and for many things, I'm just so very, very grateful. I think that's all I need to say today. Thank you so much for this opportunity.